Is Greetings, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's 10 o'clock. Maybe we should just give it a few minutes, a minute or two. I see many people joining us from all over, especially from China. Did you mute someone? Mr. Nee, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Bana. I'm here.
Can we go ahead?
Yeah, I
Ms.
think
Liu?
so. Please go ahead. Thank you very much.
Ms. Liu, I'm going to start off the session, yeah? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly a pleasure to have such an esteemed panel joining us today, especially with this real intriguing subject and topic today. Just to get some sort of housekeeping out of the way, I also just want to thank Mr. Nee of China Africa, the chief editor of the China Africa magazine, for helping and putting this webinar together. Just to sort of maybe give you some indication, this is China Africa, the magazine, and this is Diplomatic Society. I hope you can see that. Yes, and you know, we in South Africa have been publishing the Diplomatic Society for the past 20 years. And Pretoria, the city where I am from, has one of the largest number of diplomatic representations in the world. I think the number is around 134. So it's a hive of diplomacy here in Pretoria. And the reason we are doing this webinar today with China Africa is the South African Communist Party also turns 100. You know, it's a significant milestone. 100, you know, 100 is a significant milestone. The CPC, the China Communist Party, also turns 100, and it got me thinking. You know, these our countries, China, South Africa, geographically China, Africa. The histories stretch back many millennia. You know, China's got a deep history. South Africa has got a deep history as well. And you know, if we take the 100 years, 1921 to 2021, and we put the time frame and we frame it within the human context, you know, the last 100 years, you know, there has been. It's been an epoch in technological and societal transition and transformation. You know, in terms of logistics, flight, transportation, this webinar, for example, as we are discussing today, we've got people from different hemispheres speaking to each other, connecting, and as it has become the norm in the way we communicate, the way we meet, the way we conference, this has become more and more the norm. The emergence of China under the stewardship of the Communist Party of China has been profound, to say the least. Only recently, President Xi announced that the Chinese have achieved the goal of lifting all its people out of poverty. And many wealthy nations haven't yet been able to achieve this this goal of bringing people out of poverty, giving them dignity, allowing them access. And this is going to have far-reaching effects, not only for China, but the world at large. So the Communist Party, which has over 91 million memberships, as Mr. Ni explained to me, it's in contrast to the South African Communist Party, which is a very influential party, but not as many members as 91 million members. But they have also played a significant role in South Africa's history. As you may know, the struggle for equality, the struggle for freedom, liberation. The Communist Party of South Africa was central to the achievements of the current status in South Africa, and play a significant role in our parliament, as well as with the tripartite alliance, which consists of the SACP, the ANC, and COSATU, which is the labor movement. The question that came to my mind, from the panelists, Comrade Mahlako, I'm maybe looking to you also, just to how did these two nations, these two people with such distances, 100 years ago, 1921, how did they come to find a common ideology? And this is maybe something that we can have a discussion on, and give us a bit of a history and move us into what's happening today, and where we go to from here. So I just want to take care of some housekeeping before I hand over to Ms. Liu Yunyun from the Beijing Review content editor. We have the bios and CVs up, but we will share them with you. Just make sure your mute functions, your video functions are working fine, and just be aware of them. And also just keeping, we've been doing this for a while now, so just the webinar etiquette that we could just follow. We've all seen some of these strange and funny incidences of webinars that have taken place on social media, but I won't go into that. Having said that, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Ni, once again. And with that, let me hand you over to Ms. Liu Yunyun to introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ms. Liu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bana, for your kind and insightful introduction. And my name is Liu Yunyun. I am content director of Beijing Review. And I'm also joining Mr. Bana to be the moderator of today's webinar. And first of all, please allow me to send my warmest welcome to everyone attending this webinar today, and special greetings to our South African comrades. And the Communist Party of China, as Mr. Bana had mentioned, is the world's largest Marxist ruling party with more than 91 million members, and has been in power for over 70 years now. So, we know at the same time, the South African Communist Party, as mentioned by Mr. Bana, was created the same year as the CPC. And how are our South African comrades? And we can't wait to listen to the stories from Mr. Matilako, Second Deputy General Secretary of the South African Communist Party. Mr. Matilako.
Thank you. Let me quickly unmute. Oh, I'm unmuted. No, thank you very much for the opportunity. And also, I feel very honored to have been invited to be a part of this auspicious occasion. Indeed, it marks a very important moment of historic significance, not only between China and South Africa, the Communist Party of China and the Communist Party of South Africa, in the year of their centenary, but also because I think in the South African Communist Party, we have the view that China's developments have an impact on the world situation, and therefore they need to be followed very closely. They need to be attended to very closely. Again, I mean, my gratitude to the people that organized this webinar and everybody else participating, the panelists, and so. Let me quickly make the point that the Communist Party of China and the Communist Party of South Africa are celebrating the end of July, beginning August, the founding dates. So these two parties in essence are, if you like, twins born apart. They are on separate geographic locations, born around the same time, and basically for the same purpose as Marxist Lenin's parties, and over time, the Chinese party evolved to include its own characteristics and its own elaboration of Marxism as an important aspect thereof. So that's the period in which, that's the era, that's the conjuncture. These parties came into existence and were hugely inspired by the Great October Socialist Revolution of 1917 in Russia, which ushered in a new era in world affairs at the time. It is in this period that many communist parties, following the example of Lenin's socialist revolution, ushered into existence their own country's communist parties along the lines of the Soviet Communist Party. The Communist Party of South Africa, the CPSA, as it was then known, formed largely by a white emigre population, was founded in Cape Town the end of July, beginning August in 1921. The Communist Party was founded around the same time in Shanghai, China. As we said, this makes these two parties almost twins, born apart in two separate settings and varying locations. The first major similarity yet difference between these two parties is their geographic locations. The Communist Party of South Africa, which later re-established itself as the South African Communist Party in the underground when it was prohibited around the 1950s, was the first continental Communist Party formation to exist and represented a major advance in the quest for both national liberation and the struggle for socialism on the African continent. The settings of these two parties are similar yet different. Both were born in third world settings, if you like, and in conditions of deep poverty and underdevelopment. They confronted the challenge of national liberation and socialist reconstruction at the same time. Throughout their existence, they were characterized by purges and others, internal contradictions, and differences that emerged over the conjunctural positions to be taken at the time. It is our contention that these two parties have, in their own separate ways, contributed enormously towards theorization and further elaboration of the socialist theory and socialist construction itself. In the case of the South African Communist Party, the bringing into being of what's called the Black Republic thesis, which was adopted at the 6th Comintern Congress was an important groundbreaking theorization for the conditions of South Africa. It was a key feature for South African society to connect the question of race and interrelationship with class in South Africa. Of course, these developments did not go without clashes internally in the party itself. But we want to make the point that the Communist Party, through this adoption of the Black Republic thesis, elaborated an important postulation for what we later came to call colonialism of a special type in South Africa. It was explaining the material conditions of South Africa's situation. This hugely informed the theory of struggle and the entire national liberation movement, and underpinned the prosecution and the tactical appreciation that the struggle elaborated later in the years. And also the turn to armed struggle, which was anticipated by the Communist Party of South Africa in the later parts of the 1950s, at the time also sent a delegation of senior party cadres for military training in China and were received by the Chinese leader Mao Zedong. This marked the beginning of an important page of historic ties between these two parties and would later develop to higher levels over the years. These relations were also impacted upon by the Sino-Soviet split. These two parties maintained cordial relations even in that period. The incorporation of the lessons from a study visit, if you want to argue East Asia also, by the National Liberation Movement to Vietnam in around 1978, contributed significantly towards the National Liberation Movement's understanding and theorization of the armed struggle itself. The study visit concluded that the main means should rather be political organization by political means, legal, semi-legal, and underground. The National Liberation Movement's ultimate interest in developing such a popular political base remained what it had been earlier, to equip itself to mount a sustained revolutionary armed struggle for the seizure of state power. And beyond 1978, you see the rise in internal conflict in South Africa by 1976, in which month we are, just a day or so into it, student uprisings from 1980s and so on, the internal strife that marked that important phase of our revolution, culminating in 1990s, the unbanning of the National Liberation Movement and other political parties, and in 1994. All of these are lessons that have been learned through studies and others of the prosecution of armed struggle in East Asia, and also lessons that were learned in China itself. We want to argue that these key considerations were pushed forward by a number of factors, not least, as we said, the Soweto uprisings, including the South African Communist Party, which was later the Communist Party of South Africa, which was later renamed the South African Communist Party in the underground, regarding the possibility of popular insurrection in its 1962 program, The Road to South African Freedom, as well as in 1970, the Central Committee, the seminal document, The Party and Armed Struggle. Looking at the Chinese Communist Party, we want to draw just a few important, well, in our case, understandings of what has marked this important elaboration of theory and tactical considerations. In the Deng Xiaoping era, referred to as the opening up period, after huge difficulties in the process of the prosecution of the struggle, we learned that an important era which ushered in a feature of modern day China's development was this process of opening up. Deng Xiaoping is regarded as a product of the integration of the basic theory of Marxism-Leninism with the practice of modern China, and the characteristics of the present era, the inheritance and the development of Mao Zedong thought under new historical conditions, a new stage of development of Marxism in China. The Xiaoping theory seeks to adapt the new existing socio-economic conditions in China. Deng Xiaoping stressed the opening up of China to the outside world, the implementation of one country, two systems, and through the phrase, seek truth from facts, advocation of political and economic pragmatism. This is important in order to understand later day developments in China and also appreciate the accelerated developments that have occurred in China alongside economic, political, cultural and other developments that have occurred in China. The theoretical elaboration of socialism with Chinese characteristics, we want to argue, became part of seeking to comprehend the developments and socialist construction in China in those conditions. Since then, China has experienced the extraordinary rise that defies easy comprehension, not only for foreigners, but also for the Chinese themselves, who have experienced firsthand the world's fastest economic and social transformation for 3 decades running. We think one of the important contributions that China has made, among the many other things that China has contributed in this era, is what we call the new development model. The most important lesson from these changes that have occurred over the years, particularly as it relates to China, among others, is the rise of the development model. Among others, it is important for the developing world to seek to draw lessons from in consideration of their own conditions, but also adapting that to their particular circumstances. In South Africa, which is still in the face of the National Democratic Revolution, the context and many others may be different, but the aspiration of building a developmental state has been bandied about as a key achievement in order to try and address what we call the triple challenges that still confront post-apartheid society in South Africa. For the SACP, such a developmental state is perceived to be part of the building blocks towards socialist construction. The Asian model, which is mainly under the influence of China also, refers to state-guided modernization process, as shown in the case of the 4 little dragons, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, which all share similar cultural backgrounds, which is argued by one important Chinese intellectual and writer, Zheng Weiwei. Similarly, the little dragons, China has successfully pursued its modernization program while simultaneously transforming its planned economy into a socialist market economy. The rise of a super large nation with almost 1.3 billion people also means that its model of development produces a scale effect unmatchable by not only the 3 dragons, but by the entire world. And the China model is therefore more likely to generate a greater and more lasting impact on the world. It must also be remembered that Deng Xiaoping's concept of don't imitate the West, do not imitate other socialist countries, but also do not give up on your own advantages is very profound and very significant. On the basis of the 3 nodes, China has explored boldly various institutional innovations and drawn on other strengths while giving way to its own strength, gradually shaping its own model of development. In China, the role of the Chinese Communist Party is in no small measure a huge contributor to what has been achieved to date. In the year of the centenary of these 2 parties, there's still lots to be achieved for humanity and mankind. The current trajectory of the Belt and Road Initiative, where the post-apartheid South African state and progressive formulations play an important part, both in South Africa and on the continent, is an important connector of that geography, that space, and commonality of peoples and their aspirations. These contributions towards the development model suited for the peculiar conditions of each country is an important part of the further elaboration of prosecution of the struggle and socialist construction. Contribution of the South African Communist Party in these debates is very crucial and important. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us time. Sheshe.
Thank you very much, Comrade Matilako, and thank you for wrapping up the achievements of the Communist Party of China in about 10 minutes. And thank you for your observation. And let's turn to Professor Peng Yi. Professor Peng, do we have you online here, Professor Peng?
I'm here.
Yes.
Can you give me the opportunity to share my PPT?
Okay, no problem. And Professor Peng is Director of Center for Africa-China Studies at University of Johannesburg. Professor Peng, please.
Thank you. Now, it wrote in the screen that forbidden me to share my screen. I will share my PPT. Can someone help me?
Yes, we just checked, Professor Peng, we just checking it.
So I start first.
Okay.
Thank you, co-chairs, that Ms. Liu Yunyun and Mr. Curtin Bana. Thanks to the China, Africa, and the Diplomatic Society invitation to me. Dear all, good morning and good afternoon from the guests from Beijing. Still forbidden share my PPT. So
okay, we are checking. I think maybe give me one second.
Okay, don't worry. So I also sent my PPT to Mr. Ni. Mr. Ni.
Oh, yes, maybe I will try.
Okay. Mr. Ni is going to try. Thank you.
So I can start first, then waiting for you approve me to share my screen. Okay. As we all are aware, under the leadership of Communist Party of China, China got great achievements in economic, public security, social well-being, environment protection in the past years. Positive comments and praise are the mainstream from our African friends, even the world. With the coming of 100th anniversary of Communist Party of China on 1st July 2021, the research and topic on why CPC is so successful and what can learn from are hot than any time. Today, I would like to share the advancing law-based governance by Communist Party of China that play an important role in the governance of China. Still forbidden. Okay. So the first stage, led by our chairman Mao Zedong from 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded. China formulated 1954 the first constitution law. It confirmed that the power of the states belonged to people, and China is a democracy country mastered by people. Chinese people exercise their rights through National People's Congress and Local People's Congress. I try again, count. In this period, the Communist Party of China confirmed that all the ethnic groups are equal. We have 56 ethnic groups. And system of multi-party cooperation, revolutionary committee of the Chinese. So there are 8 other parties in China. Also, we set up the political consultation, and the democratic centralism. I try again, can't. Okay, I continue. So the second stage, led by Deng Xiaoping from 1978, who is the chief architect of China's socialism reform and opening and modernization building. In this period, the Communist parties focused on improving the socialism legal system, service for economic, productivity, inform and opening up. They put forward, I try again. Okay, if you approve, I can use my PPT in my cell phone because I didn't prepare the draft. Yeah.
Sorry about it, ma'am, Prof.
Yeah, don't worry.
I'm just trying to see. We're trying to get the mail from to see if we can put it up.
Yeah, it is right forbidden me to share my screen. Okay.
But I think it's okay, Lily. We can hear you. We can hear you very clear. If you could just continue.
Okay. Thank you, David. Now to the second stage, led by Deng Xiaoping. Okay. So, in this period, the Communist Party of China also formulate some very basic principle, in the legal field, like there must be laws to go by. The laws must be observed and enforced strictly, and lawbreakers must be prosecuted. And a series of important statutes were formulated. On 1st June 1979, China passed 7 statutes, which is very famous 1-day 7 statutes in China's history of law, such as the criminal law, criminal procedure law, election law of the National People's Congress and local People's Congress at all levels, organic law of the People's Courts, organic law of the People's Procuratorates. A series of important statutes were formulated after that, such as the civil law, administrative procedure law. Then we came the third stage, led by President Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao from 1998. In this period, our socialist legal system with Chinese characteristics was established. And they also focused on rule of law, and the constitutional law of social legal country were included into the Constitution of People's Republic of China. That is the amendment in 1992. Also, they put forward some important legal opinions. Socialist market economy of China is the legislative economy. Administration according to law, respect and protect to human rights. Then the fourth stage, led by President Xi Jinping from 2012. And President Xi Jinping and the CPC in this period, they put forward some big dreams and goals, such as building a moderately prosperous society, strive for the great success for socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, realize the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. So this period, the law-based governance serves for the above goal and is lifted as a basic strategy. Okay, I will try again. Okay, now so can you see the screen? Yeah. So the first stage, the second stage, the third stage. Yeah. and now the fourth stage led by our President Xi Jinping. So I just mentioned, we put forward this, like the Chinese dream, the highest level goal. Then this period, the law-based governance service for the above goal is lifted as a basic strategy and be an essential requirement and important guarantee for socialism Chinese characteristic. And also in this period, we can see that in the report to the 19th National Congress of CPC 2017, the law-based governance became a basic strategy, also passed very important the decision of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China on some major issues concerning comprehensive law-based governance. Also set up the Central Committee for Comprehensive Law-Based Governance, exercise unified leadership over the initiative to build rule of law in China. And then that is a milestone of our law, that is Constitution of People's Republic of China 2018 amendment. In it, that put forward and emphasized the scientific outlook on development and material, spiritual, eco-political, social civilization. In this period, the President Xi and the Communist Party of China has three characteristics in the advancing the law-based governance. Focus on exercise and enforcement of law. Also, President Xi directed the timeline that is 3 steps to building the law-based governance country. He himself also led to reform in the field of many fields reformers, such as the judicial system, advanced judicial justice, criminal law system, administration law enforcement, strengthen the construction of legal work team tenant training, such as formulate 12 levels of judges and related treatment. Also, reform the field of teaching and learning in universities. Emphasize the leadership of the Communist Party of China of the law-based government, lay out some steps detailed methods. Also attach importance to the governance, the party with rigor, and then advance the law-based governance. They also set up a national committee of the supervision, and to against the corruption. And I recommend, if you have interest, you can read carefully the report to the 19th National Congress of Communist Party of China in 2017. There are 2 main parts to emphasize the many important legal appellants of the law-based governance of China. For the time limit, I just mentioned some important appellants. You can see the first emphasis the Constitution. Emphasis its heart of which that the Chinese system of socialist rule of law. Also pursue coordinate progress in law-based governance. Law-based exercise of the state, law-based government administration, promote the integrated development of rural country, government, and society. Then come to the rule of law and the rule of virtue. And the law-based governance of the country, also we need the rule-based governance over the party. Then come the reform of the judicial system. And the second part in this report, that in the advancing law-based governance, we can see the Communist Party of China emphasizes again that advancing law-based governance in all fields is a profound revolutionary Chinese governance. And we must promote the rule of law and work to ensure sound law-making, strict enforcement, impartial administration of justice, and the observance of law by everyone. Then comes the lawmaking in a well-conceived and democratic way. Then comes the law-based governance administration. Reform the judicial system and enforce judicial accountability. Raise public awareness, and also raise party organization and every party member that must take lead in respecting, learning about, observing, and applying the law. So, I want to introduce that Communist Party and China's input to international law and international society. First, the community of shared future. This is accord with the Charter of the United Nations. That is our President Xi Jinping proposed in his address in the United Nations in 2017, which now has been a principle in international law and has been accepted by more and more countries. A few countries allege that they are prior to other countries and unite some the most developed countries to lay out international regulation and if it benefit them, benefit some very few countries. That's unfair. That's the ignorance of the developing and the undeveloped country. China also create 5 principles of peaceful and coexistence. They are accepted as an international principle, such as mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, mutual non-aggression, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, peaceful coexistence. Also, the third, resolve the international dispute. China is very calm down and through law. When we confront the illegal interference of some very few countries, such as to our Xinjiang, Taiwan, Xizang, China formulated the anti-foreign sanctions law, which is not only to these a few countries, but also to the country disobey the international law. And you can see China obeyed to the basic principle of the international law, principle of reciprocity, retenient principle to formulate related laws to protect our national dignity and state sovereignty. And additional, just now that Comrade Matako also mentioned that China create one country and two systems. It's also a devotion in the field of the government succession to resolve the conflict between the regional conflict. So come to a conclusion. The China's advancing law-based governance by the Communist Party of China play a very important role in the governance of China. You can see when we confront like the COVID-19, like some country attacked to us, Chinese people are now very, very united than any time before. So we are confident on the Communist Party of China's leadership, and we will strive for better lives in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Peng, and it was very, very insightful speech and lecture. And I want to draw our speaker's attention to the concept that you've mentioned. One is law-based governance, and the other is rule of law. And apparently, rule of law is something the Western media, the Western politicians have been, repeating all the time, like rule of law, rule of law. But in the Chinese concept, we're using law-based governance, and I think it deserves a huge paper or a book to describe the differences between these two concepts, and that would be very, very interesting. And with that, let's come to Comrade Andila Moshe. who is the first Deputy National Secretary of the Young Communist League of South Africa. Comrade Mosha. Comrade Mosha, are you?
Thanks, Program Director. Although it is awkward to speak after the second Deputy General Secretary of the party, as he was making the remarks earlier. But it suffices to say, in less than the minutes we were given, to say Young Communist League of South Africa came into existence as a result of a resolution of the then Communist Party of South Africa. The main purpose of this was to form a youth-dedicated organization which is going to champion and make it possible that will get and chart as well as introduced into Marxism-Leninism at an early stage. And the main purpose was to make sure that when they reach the stage where they join Communist Party, they will be a better person by being able to understand concretely or at a basic level at least what is expected of them. The YCL was established in 1922 as a result of the Congress resolution of the party. And it is an autonomous organization as well as is playing a most instrumental role, which is regarded as a preparatory school of this party. Then throughout its existence, YCL had its activities aligned to those of the then Communist Party of South Africa, now South African Communist Party. Then when Communist Party was banned through suppression of communism in the 1950s, YCL also was banned. But when the party was re-established underground, YCL was not re-established. This was due to the fact that conditions that were prevailing by then didn't allow a situation where the party will be able to nurture and comprehend both organizations at the same time. Now, as the struggle for liberation was continuing, then came the period wherein the liberation movement and other organizations which were banned between 1950 and 1960, then came into the 1990s wherein these organizations were unbanned. Then the party preoccupied itself as well to make it possible that they re-establish or relaunch the YCL so as to make sure that in this era, it will be able to continue to play the role it is intended. YCL, as it is existing now, is among others trying to ensure that we champion interests of young people and dedicate them towards a revolutionary cause. And all of this is being done in making sure that the working class interests as well as struggles are championed both within the country as well as globally. And we are committed to the struggle for the transformation of South Africa, which is currently a capitalist society, into a socialist society in which there is going to be no form of exploitation of one person or a group by another. As well, we are in existence making sure that we bring new ideas in the mother body, which is the Communist Party, and our participation in the party as it is not to comprehend and where possible to live with the dreams. We dedicated our campaigns as well as our activities in making sure that at some point the Communist Party of South Africa assumes a better position than it is playing now by being able to be like the CPC, Communist Party of China. We are inspired by this because, as other speakers have alluded, Communist Party of China is by far excellence and a good example that can be followed, because we can no longer say in our presence we are going to implement, or we are going to move with Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism and other philosophers that are related to left ideology as it is. It is important to ensure that, and most probably we also assume or adopt, as the Chinese have done, to say our socialism as we move on we must make sure that they have characteristics that are South African, but we must make sure that whatever that we do is not defined outside of what is happening in the globe. Thanks, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Comrade Masha. And we are very grateful for you to say that China, the Communist Party of China, has actually offered a very good example for the communist parties elsewhere to follow, because before the success of the Communist Party of China, and we have Soviet Union. So that is not very good successful model, but we are. It's great pleasure to hear from you, and we are truly inspired. And with that, let's come to Professor Xia Qingjue, who is professor in economics, School of Economics and Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development of the Peking University. And Professor Xia has written extensively on China's political system. And let's hear from Professor Xia.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the invitation for this very important event of discussing the China's success, and also the comparison of Chinese Communist Party and the South Africa's Communist Party. And I want to share my screen. Yeah, today my focus is talking about the rooting out poverty in China. And that's the first part. Second part, I was talking about what is a philosophical China. And before we start, I want to make a long story short, which is how China come to the current state. People will say that successful catch-up industrialization in past years also making things happening in China right now. During this industrialization process, hundreds of millions of rural laborers, they migrated to the city and work in the city, and then there are these laborers and their families behind in the rural area be lifted out of poverty. So that's the most important part of China's successful story. After the 40 years trickle-down effect of this economic growth and the industrialization, there are still persistent poverty in China, hardcore poverties, such as people living in the mountainous areas in the northeast China and the southeast China, and some of them living in very hot conditions in the mountainous area, and also living on the desert, and also the extreme water shortages areas. So in these areas, the people they suffered, still suffering from the poverty. So for these areas, there will be a market failure. From my own studies, from 6 rounds of National Representative Household Survey, from 1998 to the 2018, industrialization for the since the year of 1913, industrialization stopping reducing rural poverty in China. So before we find out, before 2013, we find out industrialization significantly reducing poverty across the whole China. So something happened around 2010, when China become surpassed Japan as the second largest economy and the #1 manufacturing country. So this kind of persistent poverty need government action. So that's the reason for the 2020 rooting out poverty campaign happened in China. And there's always been arguing the economists. The economists always believe in the market. However, market could not solve the last mileage problem. So, for example, they never provided the electricity to the poor. They never provided the internet access to the poor. They never provide the medical service to the poor. So that's a problem for the market. So putting this aside, the ideology, take advantage both the state-owned enterprise and non-state-owned enterprise, the market and non-markets. So China solve these poverty problems. And also China have plans. In China, we have saying that plans beat no plans. Always in the history, plans beat no plans. And I talk about the evolution of the poverty concept. At the very beginning of the 20th century, Rowntree, English economist, they argued that poverty is generally defined as consumption or income poverty. In the late 1970s, Nobel Prize winner Amartya Sen found out that poverty largely is a phenomenon called deprivation of personal capabilities, such as health. And hang on for a minute. 你直接回来吧，直接回办公室。And at the turn of the millennium, another two professors from Oxford, Professor Elker and Foster, they proposed the multi-dimensional poverty measurement based on the Amartya Sen's capability approach. So in rooting out the poverty campaign implemented since 2014, the Chinese government actually adopted a simplified multi-dimensional poverty, which called 2 not worries: not worrying food, not worrying clothing, 3 guarantees, guaranteeing 9-year compulsory education for children under the use of school age, medical care, guaranteeing medical care, and guaranteeing housing safety, not guaranteeing house, but housing safety. So there's a multi-dimensional poverty standard. So in the 2020 rooting out poverty campaign, there's a multi-dimensional poverty standards, not just incomes. In particular, emphasizing the education and also medical care. So by the definition of income poverty, a total of about 800 million per people has been lifted out of poverty in China over the past 40 years also, since the country's reform and opening up. And when we talk about this Chinese success, we should think about what happening before the foundation of the new China, the poverty in 1949. The poverty before the new China in 1949, in 1949, China was an agricultural country, only with some handicraft industries, unable to produce even bicycles, sewing machines, let alone cars and aircraft and ships. So in 1949, China's rural literacy rate was more than 95%, and only 5% of the school-age children can go to the school, schools. So the death rate is very high. Average lifespan is only 35 years. So the income is really low. And perhaps you can see that in 1949, China suffered from widespread poverty of the whole country. And since the new China, China started all sorts of reforms. And also we always say the past 40 years, 70 years also, the new China's economic development is fighting for the poverty. So the first reform is the land reform, poverty elevation by land reform. Under the old regime, the land was owned by the landlords, and these people exploiting the tenants left them poor. To help the poor, so New China implemented the land reform, confiscated the land owned by the landlords and capitalists, and evenly distributed among the rural households by their numbers of household members and workers. Later on, under the commune system, the protection brigade, all the land was collectivized. So before the economic reform, which is carried out in the late 1970s, China was still very poor. 76 of the rural residents living under poverty lines. One reason why there's so poor, still widespread poverty in the late 1970s is that the population of China was doubled from 500 million in 1949 to almost a billion in 1977. So there's Mauthausen's loss of population. So that's a problem. That's one of the problems. Maybe in other regions. So in the economic reform started in the late 1970s. The first reform is a declassification of the rural sector. So at that time, Chairman Deng said, poverty is not characteristic of socialism. So abolishing the collectively owned land system, returning the land to the rural household on long-term base was the start of economic reform. So this rural reform greatly increased the Chinese rural productivity and also lifted many people out of the poverty. And apart from the land reform in the 1950s, China also did some other very important reforms and also the poverty elevation. The first most important one is education. Actually, in the 1949, 95% of the rural illiterate rate is 95%. So almost all the people they can't read. So the Chinese new government they set up a central committee for animation of the illiterate and starting the literacy movement, setting up the literacy class of all sorts across the country. And also, most important thing, we set up the 9-year compulsory education system. So the poor boys and the poor girls, even in the mountainous areas, from the ethnic minorities, they can go to schools. So that's the most interesting things. And actually, I went to the primary school in 1971. At that time, I was a poor country boy. And I always say I'm a Chairman Mao's boy. And Deng Xiaoping's college student. And later on, I have the opportunity to study abroad and come back to become a professor in the Peking University. So I'm the example of New China. So many people in China is actually like me. They did much better than me. Sometimes they become the leaders of the China. They are the Chairman Mao's children, boys, girls. And they grew up in the Deng Xiaoping's reform area, and we grew up with China. So there's an expansion of the enrollment of the higher education sectors in the late 1990s. So in the year of 1998, we only have, every year, the Chinese university will only admit 1 million university students. But right now, we admit 7 million every year. So by 2025, the cumulatively China will have 200 million college students, college graduates. So you think about the numbers. The American population is about 350 million. The Russian population less than 100 million. The Japanese population is 150 million. So by 2025, we're going to have in China, we're going to have 200 million college graduates. And this number is going to increase more. So that's the strength of China. we empower the people, we educate the youth and give them a strength. So if give them the right environment, the technology break will erupt in a large amount in the future. And another most important part of the Chinese fighting for the poverty is through the health care. Perhaps everybody agree with me. The most important part of the things in the world would be getting the medical treatment. In 1949, China's rural health care system was underdeveloped. There's a endemic disease was common in the countryside. So there are widespread of shortage of doctors and also the medicines. The average life expectancy was 35 years in 1949. So one of the lowest in the world. To change this condition in the countryside, Chinese government make decision to carry out the healthcare activities in the whole country, in particular in the rural areas. So at that time, Chairman Mao asked the Ministry of Healthcare to set up a very famous rural doctor system. We call it barefoot doctor system. Although this kind of doctor, they didn't get good training, but they can cure the basic disease, and they totally help the rural peoples. And actually, there's something happening after 1978, the weakening of the rural cooperative medical system, and also the disappearance of the barefoot doctors lead to the problem in the rural health care. And in 2003, the Chinese government called for the creation of a new rural cooperative medical system. So right now, we have the new rural cooperative medical system, and almost 95% of the rural residents, they get medical insurance. So that's the new China. That's right now. And in the last year, I actually participated in a program. It's called assessing the Linxia prefecture in the Gansu province, which is a very poor areas. And this area is around the northwest of China. It's called Gansu province. And you can see here, it's a like a bones. It's a corridor to the far west of China, and very poor areas, the deserts and the plateau. And you can see that's the provincial city, and that's the Linxia area. And also here, that's the area I went. It's a mountainous areas, very poor. It's how poor it is. They get in the drinking water down the foot of the mountain, and the dusty while sunshine, muddy while raining. School drop-offs widespread, hard to get access to medical care, and poor housing, hard to increase income. And these areas in the far west of China. That's before the rooting out poverty campaign. That's the old house they live in, and every day's work they getting water down at the foot of the mountain. And they have, they have a donkey to carrying the water, and they have people carrying the water, and have a little girl carrying a little bit of water. But right now, our households get access to tap water. Our households are connected with the cement road. Our households are living in a safe house. 225, 800 old and unsafe house has been rebuilt and refurbished. Our household engaging economic activities, and disposable income was doubled from 3,000 per person to the 7,000 per person in the year before last year. So every village has its own special industry. That's right now after the rooting out poverty campaign. And the school dropout was persuaded to go back to school, and a third from the poor households and more than 2,000 schools has been constructed, and the enrollment of the preschool children was 95.36%. The enrollment of the high school youth is 80%. So that's the after the rooting out poverty campaign. So you can see the new Linxia area here. They have everything been out. That's a new house, and that's a new environment, and that's the new schools, and that's the schools for the training the workers. And also medical care. So every village has their own medical rooms, so you can the locals can go to the local medical rooms, the village medical rooms to get the treatment. And they also during the past 5 years, 14,007 households residents was being relocated, because originally they live in a very poor areas, but right now you can see they live in the new house. And also these kind of residents have been provided with all sorts of jobs, so making the reallocation is much applicable. The people they get jobs, so they get incomes. So this kind of reallocation is sustainable. And also in the Linxia, the far west of China, the two most important things that was moved. One is the women. We have in the Dongxiang County, the women, they are ethnic minorities. They are never allowed to go out of the village. They do not have any money, and everything was controlled by the mother-in-law. Their only job is to doing the give birth to children and doing the sewing and the cooking every day. So right now, since the rooting out the poverty campaign started, we have a program called the East-West Cooperative on the poverty reduction. So the companies, they set up the factory just outside of the village, just beside the village, like the clothing factory, like the footwear factories, like the knitting factories. So the local women, they are from ethnic minorities. They are persuaded to work in the factories. At the very beginning, it's very hard to asking these people to work in these women to work in the factories. But one by one, eventually they come to the factories. Every month, they can earn 3,000 Chinese yuan. And they just 5 minutes walk from the home. So right now, I went to the factories. There's no man in the factory, only women. We have to consider the local the environment. At the very beginning, those husbands, they watch at the windows of the workshop. So eventually they find that nothing happened, and their wife just bring money to home. And these women, when they first get their first month's salary, all the women, they have tears in their eyes. They feel they much lifted. They lifted out of poverty. And they find out they can earn money. They can maintain themselves as well. That's the most moving part of this poverty reduction in China. So right now, in the place where I went, I have about 200 these kind of factories. They employed about 10,000 women of ethnic minorities. And these people, they never work. Some majority of them, they can't read. But in the factory, in the weekend, the factory also provided the education, medical knowledge, and to these women. So these women being liberated by the poverty reduction. Right now, they work in the factory. They can write their names in the life. So that's the graphs. These women, these ethnic minority women, they work in the factories. And also here, you can they're doing the sewing, they're making the footwears. Another important story is we have the East-West poverty reduction program, and we have a very very interesting company. They come from the Xiamen city. And the Xiamen city is supposed to have the Linxia, that's a prefecture to poverty, in fighting the poverty. And this company, they can sell all the vegetables that produced in this prefecture to the east part of the China. And so there's a great achievement, because the Western people, Western part of people, they do know how to do the marketing. And these firms, they good at do the marketing. So they just collect all the products, all the vegetable products and the foods from this local far west China, and selling to the eastern part, and immediately help these locals get rid of poverty. So it is also another very important success story. So that's happening in China. Not only the people fighting the poverty by themselves, people from across the country help the far west people fighting the poverty. So that's the original one, and that's the new. That's the old one. That's the new one. That's the old one. That's the new one. So that's the new one. That's the new one. That's the old one. That's the old house. And that's the new house. They live in the good areas. And that's the village. And that place, the President Xi has been visited. You can see President Xi just sitting here. There's a desk table and talking with the locals. And President Xi went to that in the February of 2013. So I went to that house and take the picture by myself. Right now, these people, they live in they relocated. They live in this house, and very modernized house. And they have factories just beside the factory, just beside village. They have factories. Those local women, they work in the factories. Right now, they earn more money than their husbands. So you can see the picture. The new schools donated from the eastern the cities, and the school children and the local industries. So that's what's happening in China. Since that's the rooting out the poverty campaign. The second part of
we're almost running out of time. What about I give you another 3 minutes to wrap up?
Okay. I just drag go to the conclusion.
Thank you.
Yeah, and concluding remarks. China is anti-imperialist, anti-aggression history since 1948. Implies not by maintaining the strong politically, economically, and cultural environment, and China remain invincible in the international and political competition. And actually, recently I have a paper published by the Beijing Review, and I'm very happy to publish this paper because I have some thinkings, and I want to search the philosophical. What is philosophical China? And I find out that China is philosophically China is a collectivism by the history, and also China is opening. It's an open society since a very old time, opening all the time. In particular, in the last 40 years, we have been opening up to the world all the time. So my conclusion is the history of Chinese civilization since the three great rulers 4,000 years ago, Yao, Shi Yu, demonstrate that China must hold on to its core of collectivism and strengthen this core through the opening, through the open institutional construction. In other words, collectivism and the open society are the essential elements for China to remain strong. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Xia. And Professor Xia, you shared with us your personal experience of helping people in poor areas, and we are very, very grateful. And you also shared with us a heartwarming story of your own. And by the time you went to school, I wasn't even born yet. But in a Western kind of wording, you are a living example of the American dream made in China. So we're looking forward to more success stories, personal success stories. And with that, let's move to Dr. David Mounian, who is Director of Center for Africa-China Studies of the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Mounian, are you there? Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers, China Africa magazine, as well as the Diplomatic Society here in South Africa. It is indeed a great pleasure to participate in this important discussion. And I would like also to thank our fellow panelists. Quite a number of comments and that were quite excellent, and would like to request that our organizers, if we could share some of the presentation. We learned a great deal. What is it that I would like to focus on? My focus is in two parts, and I'm just going to speak to my presentation. Firstly, I can't start without congratulating the CPC for 100 years, as well as our own SACP for 100 years. Therefore, the big question that I would ask, what made the CPC survive the entire history of its existence, particularly the latter years of the Cold War? And it is not the only socialist Marxist party. There are so many others. We have communist parties in the entire Europe, in America itself, but more importantly, the Soviet Union. Why did the Soviet Union Communist Party and the entire project collapse at the end of the Cold War? And what made CPC survive all this terrible era that the party and the world went through? And my second part of the questions that I would like to try to answer is, what are lessons that can we learn based on a wonderful presentation that has been provided? What can we learn from CPC? Our understanding of history, I think we need to put it quite clearly that when we look at China and Africa, we have so much in common. Like China, Africa went through a century of humiliation, subjugated, colonized by other powers, mainly European colonialists, conquered most of African territories. China suffered more or less the same. If we look at the Opium War, taking over Hong Kong, whether we like it or not, Taiwan, and what went through, the role of Japan. And when the Communist Party of China was established on the African continent, across 55 African countries, there was also an awareness and the rise of nationalist movements, mainly nationalist movement, and as well as the South African Communist Party. We also went through assisting the European colonizers in their own wars in the First World War. Like China was humiliated after the First World War, where it even lost more of its territories and a number of countries, Germany, France, United States, and others, are pulling all different part of China, breaking it up. So I think the point that we're making here is that we haven't forgotten that part. It was not just happening in China, where China was being disintegrated, divided, and conquered. Africa went through same process. And the formation of the African National Congress in South Africa, which is older than CPC and SACP, formed in 1912, assisted, because as my colleagues who have spoken in South Africa, the relationship between the SACP and ANC, which is a nationalist party, is quite close. And it's at times very hard to tell who is member of SACP and who is member of ANC. The two feed on each other. There were so many lessons that we learned with the rise of 1917 revolution in Russia, and the lessons that we learned post 1949 with the revolution in China itself. And the China Communist Party played a significant role in the liberation of the African continent. Liberation from foreign control, assisted a number of nationalist movements across our continent. In Zimbabwe, in your Zambia, your Algeria, and so many, including South Africa, assisting them with weapons, assisting with administrative and organizational ideological clarity of how to wage a revolution and how to win over. One key characteristics which I see it running, particularly the last presentation, which I'll come back to as a major lesson, is the question of what is the original mission of the CPC. And the same question we need to ask even on the African continent, particularly to SACP. What is the original mission of the party? How do we measure its successes and failure? We have to go back at all times, back to the original mission. And the major lesson that we have learned when we look at CPC, as a matter of fact, those who follow history, is that CPC learned much of its strategy from the Soviet Union Communist Party. And I was privileged to attend and visit the museum in Shanghai of CPC, and the lessons of Soviet comrades being part at the formation of CPC and the influence that they had. Yes, Comrade Chairman Mao led Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics, later stages. However, the lessons that were learned from Soviet Union were quite important and remain so. And the lessons that we've learned is a people-centered party, a people-centered party. The original mission was not just to get rid of external forces, the conquering. I think if we see the mistakes that were made in Soviet Union, was that as much as the Soviet Union managed to stay in power for quite some time, and the entire Soviet empire collapsed, at the heart of that collapse, and the lesson that we're learning with the opening up of Gorbachev, the perestroika and glasnost policies followed by Soviet Union missed one major element, which was vital to the party, it led to the death of the party, the people. They made a huge, there's so much talk and debate among historians. I think we can agree, learning from China, that there was so much a sense of wanting to be accepted by Western world. And that was done at the expense of the people. The competition with the West, particularly with the United States, was that the Soviet Union poured massive resources in the competition on arms, going to space, massive, excellent education system. However, while doing so, missed one of the major original mission, which is professor that presented and made it very clear. Putting food on the table, the health care, the road to school, ensuring that the agriculture productivity, it's not a high-level government issue, but at a family unit level, people can go to sleep, wake up, there is peace, and peace becomes right in the well-being, the belly, that you eat 3 meals a day and your health is important. I think liberating people from poverty is a major lesson we are learning, that Soviet Union failed to realize that yes, it's important to fight and compete with imperialist forces, but while you're doing so, don't lose sight of the people. Avoid queues for bread, avoid queues for basic needs of the people. And therefore, going back to the lesson that we learned, that the CPC, I mean, the party itself admits there are a lot of mistakes that were made. The party itself admits. But the question is not the mistakes that were made. The Cultural Revolution was very destructive. We all learned that. And therefore, but the party is open about it. These are mistakes that we made. However, we need to correct them. And therefore, in the interest of time, the decisive decision by Comrade Deng and his comrades within CPC around 1976, 1978 are quite critical. Turning China, that one step backwards, opening up, understanding the capitalist system, and how then you ensure that you follow the open market economy without necessarily, in part of our world, we say, never ever be more Catholic than the Pope. Manage that capitalist with Chinese characteristics. So they always, how then do you ensure that capitalistic tendencies, how do you use them without losing your socialist agenda? Which, and also going back to the mission of the people. And therefore, 1978 opening up to now, the 4 decades of opening up, and the lessons that we learned from the CPC was that as much as you had the long march fighting imperialist forces, the Japanese fighting nationalists, you don't leave that. Even going to space, there are terms that a long march into space. You go back to that language, a liberating language. You march into space. You march into alleviating people you open your system, your infrastructure development, and you ensure that you revolutionize, you reform, constant reforming policies, ensure that these policies respond to the original mission of making life better for all. That is what we learned from CPC. And that's what makes most of us in developing countries and in Africa in particular so attracted by the achievements of CPC, the leadership of CPC in China, in leading the people, taking them out of poverty. That is central. And therefore, we in Africa have made a lot of mistakes, and some of our mistakes and the parties, nationalist parties, was that we tended to liberation, yes, but after getting into power, nationalist movements forgot the people, forgot the original mission, and therefore then they became themselves elite running the show. It's all about the leaders, it's not about the people. That's where the big mistake that we made. We continuously see that. So instead of just throwing stones and complaining about the United States and all what is happening, my simple argument is that China will maintain its revolution as long as it subjects itself to its people. It doesn't matter how much noise that comes from imperialist force, it will always be there. However, its greatest strength and defense is its people. The people will never let the party down. They will remember the party is with us. It's a party of liberating. So I think of liberating our people. And that's what I think with recent events in this concluding part of my talk is that we see the closeness of Africa and China. At this particular juncture, there is a major turning point. I was privileged to give lecture to quite a number of Chinese universities. And before Donald Trump trade war, I made a huge prediction in one class. I said, China was with Africa throughout our liberation struggle. China has made huge inroads. However, the few years to come, and even now we see with the G7 meeting, NATO, and the focus that is on China at the moment, where certain forces, particularly from the West, want to ensure that China disintegrate. And they are not going to win. However, the bigger question that I'll ask, my concluding question, is how will China survive the next 100 years? How will the CPC survive the next 100 years? That is the biggest. Yes, we have deposited a very 100 years, very good, and we all celebrate with you. The lessons that we've learned from Soviet Union, from how to respond to total onslaught, aggression of Western powers. I would like to argue that China cannot, it's central that it is close to its people, it continues to deliver to its people, but at some point, it cannot survive on its own. It will need the solidarity that it had, particularly with the developing countries. We have a long history of supporting China here in Africa. In 1971, it was Africa that brought China back into United Nations Security Council to claim its rightful place. It's Africa that supported China on a number of key issues such as the Olympics. And now China, one, it cannot develop on its own. The lessons that it has learned, it can only develop and defend itself if it rises with the developing world and assist where it can, as well as getting lessons from the developing world of how best to defend itself. Because defend, it's not just a military issue. Military is important, but defend, it's education, the question of decolonizing the mind of people, and ensure that Africans constantly learn the lessons that made China reach CPC reach 100 years, and how it continues, what it can learn, what other nationalist parties and South African Communist Party in particular, what are those lessons? So I think in the interest of time, I would have loved to go and continue discussing this wonderful discussion that perhaps in question and answer we can debate more. But let me conclude by once again thanking the organizers for this wonderful talk. And I think we need more of that. As my co-director has mentioned, we're going to invite you on the 22nd of this month. We have our own big seminar on the very same topic. And therefore, we wish you all the best. I thank you, Chair. Chairs, I don't see the other chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Monian. And you raised $1 million question at the end of your speech. And you gave us very kind advices and remind the CPC in particular to remain faithful to our original mission and not forgetting people and continue to be people-centered. And thank you very, very much. And really, I really love to go on to the Q&A session, but our organizers is telling me we are running out of time. And so, Mr. Bana, you have something to say?
Thank you very much, Ms. Jean. I have a lot to say. Really a great panel discussion. I remember growing up in South Africa. There was a thing called the rooi gevaar. It's an Afrikaans term about the communist danger, and we grew up in this era. With Comrade Matlako, who explained the situation in the Communist Party's development in South Africa, there's a great lesson to learn from the CPC as well. I think one of the key things, and we've been on several other webinars, is the development of trust, once again, amongst people. What happened in China, and can be maybe other countries can relate to as well, is that the people of China trust the Communist Party. And that is why implementation, making laws, law-abiding citizen that Professor Pang spoke about is quite key. Just to briefly also go through Andile Mosha's statement. The young communists, what is it that they want? And one of the key things that came out of this discussion for me was that poverty is not a characteristic of socialism. And that is why the reforms have been so key in the development of China. And we should look at that in South Africa as well, because this word poverty, poor, it raises all the time. We're not getting away from this idea of poverty or what it's supposed to entail. And with what's happening even politically in South Africa, the Communist Party, from what I researched, was started off by mainly white laborers, white workers. So also with regards to communism in South Africa, there isn't a racial connotation to it. It's more a class struggle, and this is where we can reformulate South Africa to look at how we redistribute the wealth. Land reform, that was key for the Chinese Communist Party, and this is where we are right in the middle of these discussions. And it's so important that land reform comes to the fore. It's the only way to redistribute the land and redistribute the wealth. Professor Shai, your discussions on China and the figures that you quoted, amazing, Professor Shah, and also your personal experience. I've spoken to many of the diplomats and previous ambassadors and speaking about their own experience of handing down T-shirts and sharing T-shirts and clothing. It's fascinating to think where and how China's development, where it is, and unprecedented, and where it's going to, as Dr. Manu said, the next 100 years. Where to for China? Yes, sure, the meetings of the G7, the Quad, trying to, I'm not sure what the reason is, but China doesn't have bases all around the world, doesn't, exert its military power. It was never a colonizer. Sure, in Africa has been responsible for Europe's development. Even after the war, when Europe was devastated, they got the injection, which was called the Marshall Plan, which helped them reestablish themselves, So there are many, many discussions, many, many ideas, many thoughts that we can take from this. And yes, we look forward to perhaps, Mr. Nee, we can perhaps do another webinar in this regard. We can discuss that. With that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been a really enlightening discussion. Mr. Nee, if you would like to maybe say something, I know we are out of time. It's usually the case with the webinars, but yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Bana. Because of the time limit, I will say maybe a few words. I'm deeply impressed by all the in-depth viewpoints from all of you. And actually, I'm here to learn about what your visions on the China's development and South Africa's development. Actually, it's quite a fruitful discussion today. And thank you all. Thank you very much. Madam Liu.
Muted.
I think you are muted. Please unmute your microphone.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you very much for all of our speakers. Thank you very much, Comrade Martin Lacko, for your analogy that the Communist Party of China and the Communist Party of South Africa are twins born apart. And Professor Pone, who raised the very important idea of what law-based governance means for China. And for Comrade Mosha, and he mentioned that we need to live the dreams that we have been envisioned for the people. And Professor Shan, who mentioned his own very experience of how to move out of poverty and how he assists other people moving out of poverty. And we are very grateful for Dr. David Monien, and who raised the question of how should China deal with the next 100 years? And I think we really need another discussion, and we need another occasion to exchange ideas when we can talk more about each other's opinions. And with that, I conclude today's webinar, but that would mark the beginning of our next webinar. Is that all right?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
We will organize.
Thank you very much. And next time will be all discussion and questions and answers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.